Well, welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. My guest for this episode is Guy Kawasaki, who is the chief evangelist for Canva and former chief evangelist for Apple. He has authored over a dozen best-selling books, and his latest best-selling book, Think Remarkable: 9 Paths to Transform Your Life and Make a Difference, will be the topic of today's episode. In this episode, we explore the concept of being remarkable and the steps needed to lead a more remarkable and fulfilled life. Guy will share his firsthand experiences with us, as well as his wisdom that he has gained from remarkable individuals such as Steve Jobs, Jane Goodall, Julia Childs, and many more. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Well, I'd love for our listeners to learn more about your background, Guy. I'm sure many of them are familiar with you, but if you could just provide some more insight before we really get into all those great takeaways and tips from your latest book.
Well, I'll start in high school. So I was born and raised in Hawaii, lower middle class income part of Hawaii. And I went to a high school called Iolani, and that helped me get into Stanford. And after Stanford, I listened to the wishes of my parents, and I went to law school, and I didn't listen to my parents because I quit after 2 weeks. And the following year, I started an MBA program at UCLA, and I started working for a jewelry manufacturing company part-time. After I got my MBA, I went to that company full-time. I was in the jewelry business for about 5 years, which was just great background to learn how to sell. And then I went to a very short time for a software company that was acquired, and I didn't want to move to Atlanta. So I went to work for Apple, this startup in Cupertino, and I was in the second software evangelist in the Macintosh division. And then after that, I left. I started some companies. I went back to Apple. I left again. I started a venture capital firm. And today I am chief evangelist of Canva, which is an online graphics design service. I am a writer, speaker, and podcaster. So yeah, that's a quick synopsis of who the hell I am.
You have such a great background, so many great insights, and such great experience. And a lot of that's been captured in your latest book, Think Remarkable. So I'd love to get into kind of the book, and the goal of the book is really, for what you state, is to help you individuals make a difference. First, let's define what really does remarkable mean, because it doesn't mean amassing wealth, power, or fame, correct?
No, it doesn't. In fact, I could almost make the case that those three things are contraindicated. So I would say that being remarkable means that you've made a difference to society, that you've made the world a better place. Now, I don't want you to think that you have to be Jane Goodall or Steve Jobs to be remarkable, because you can make a difference to a small group of people. It can be a classroom, it could be a team, it could be your family, it could be one person, it could be your own self, but you have made the world a better place. And I think the way it works is you make the world a better place, then people will think you're remarkable. So people don't get the impression that this is a self-help book to help you reposition yourself as being remarkable. You got to do the work. You got to make a difference. And then being remarkable, or being considered remarkable, just flows.
Great insight. The sources that you used for this book, one was all the interviews of just amazing, remarkable people through your podcast, but you also had a second source of information material for your book, correct?
Well, I hope you're referring to the same thing I am, but I started working in Silicon Valley in about 1983, and I wrote the book in 2023. So that's 40 years. That's 40 years of hand-to-hand combat on the front lines of, in an operational role, not some kind of consulting role or some kind of, I don't know, BS kind of job. My ass was on the line for 40 years.
Well, in that firsthand experiences, I mean, you've been the chief evangelist for Apple, for Canva, worked for Google, Mercedes-Benz, started 3 companies. So that provides a wealth of experience and insights that I know helped me out as I was reading the book, and I know will help a lot of people out as well. I love how it's broken down into three parts. So you have the growth, the grit, and the grace. Why those three?
There's sort of two big reasons. So one big reason is that after interviewing about 250 remarkable people, such as Jane Goodall and Steve Wozniak, Stacey Abrams, Margaret Atwood, Angela Duckworth, Stephen Wolfram, I started to notice some patterns, and they all had a growth mindset. They all worked hard. And towards the end of their career, they decided that, it's not about them anymore. It's about paying back society. So it was obvious there were three stages. Now, at a more tactical level, I happen to love tricolons, like three things. I came, I saw, I conquered. And I love tricolons and I love alliteration. So growth, grit, and grace are tricolon with a two-letter alliteration. And maybe when I'm about to die, I'll change the subtitle or the sections to growth, grit, and grave. Or if I turn to the dark side, it will be growth, grit, and greed.
There you go. There's plenty of that in this day and age. You're right.
No kidding.
So let's start with the first stage, the growth, the building your foundation. And it really starts with adopting a growth mindset. And Carol Dweck's work is well known, the fixed versus growth mindset. But explain to me kind of, what that means in terms of being remarkable and why that's so important.
Well, remarkable people, in order to make a difference, they grow, they try new things, they do new things, they achieve more. They don't take life for granted. Certainly, life is not delivered to them on a silver platter. I mean, I can't think of an example in the book of someone who was, born into a billionaire's family or was a trust fund baby. Every one of these people had to grow and they had to change and do new things. And the flip side of that is, once you've decided that you have a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset, well, when you grow, you're going to try new things and you're initially going to face setbacks and failures because by definition, if you're growing, it ain't going to be easy. And so you need the grit mindset to persevere through all that failure. And then, like I said, towards the end of your life, it's the grace mindset where you're paying back.
Well, you mentioned in the book, too, there's a story that your wife gave you this book on writing that helped you to adopt this growth mindset about your writing and make you think that you could actually be a writer that really kind of changed your trajectory in that area as well.
Yeah. So I think when people start out, they have all kinds of self-doubt. And one of the ways to assuage your self-doubt is, maybe superficial and external, like I have a PhD in English, or I took this course in writing a book, or, something like that. I did neither of those two things. So I was, of course, wondering, who am I? Can I write a book? And my wife gave me this book called If You Want to Write by Brenda Hewlin. And the gist of that book is if you want to write, write. You don't need external permission, get over it. And now, many of you may not be writers, but if you have any kind of desire to do something creative, like be an entrepreneur, be a programmer, be a videographer, be a painter, be a musician, if you just want to do one of those things, do it. You don't need to have a PhD in music composition to be a musician.
That's an important point to make, that don't worry about special training or anyone's permission. Do it. And by doing it, you'll get better at it. And you might find an interest becoming a passion, even though you don't like the word passion, you like interest better. But it's a great way to push those things. Now, with being remarkable, there's different paths to being remarkable. You give two examples in the book. The one path is really the long-term commitment of like a Jane Goodall, where she just knew from the start, this is what she wanted. And she persevered along that course, right, long enough to become remarkable.
So yeah, that's one path. So you can grow along a path. You fall in love with animals at the age of 6, and like at 90, she's still in love with animals, still trying to make the world a better place for animals. The other path is to completely switch careers. And the example I cite is Julia Child, because up until her 30s, she was working for the OSS. The OSS is what became the CIA. So in a sense, Julia Child was a spook. And then she became a French chef. And it's not like you could say, "Oh, I'm a spook right now, but the plan is to become a French chef." I mean, that was just a growth mindset that, yeah, I'm a spook, but now I can learn how to cook.
Yeah, that's great. I love those two examples. Very inspiring. And I love what you say that growth is not going to occur in leaps and bounds or moments of miraculous epiphanies. It's much more likely to happen in baby steps.
Part of the proof I offer is that I took up ice hockey at the age of 44 and I took up surfing at the age of 60. And you know what? That's like 34 years and 50 years too late. But when you decide that, you're interested and you love surfing or hockey, you have to have a growth mindset to do that. And then you have to have the grit mindset to embrace vulnerability and, deal with failure and setbacks.
And you have a great metaphor in the book of planting acorns that's perfect for making a difference and being remarkable. And you say you must collect, prepare, plant, tend, and wait.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I did. I was just in my hill the other day and I cut down a lot of eucalyptus trees because they are very dangerous. They have shallow roots, so they fall, they catch on fire really easily and burn very hot. So, the government of California loves when you take out eucalyptus trees and make, the foothills safer. But then, you got to put something back. And I decided I would go native and put back a native species. And this is primarily coast oaks. And so I had to do research on, well, how do you repopulate oaks? And yes, you can go to the nursery and you can buy saplings and stick them in the ground. But I read that if you do that versus if you went from the acorn stage, of course, the sapling is going to have a head start, but eventually the acorn bred or the acorn generation is going to catch up. And so I started collecting acorns, and I collected hundreds of acorns, and then you put them in water, and the ones that float are dead. You throw those out. You put the ones that sink in a container covered with a piece of cloth, and you wet the cloth, and you leave it in your refrigerator for about 2 months, and then you finally plant them. I planted hundreds, and I can tell you right now, I planted hundreds, and right now I have 4 or 5 saplings. So, I mean, it's 4 or 5 probably out of 200 right now. It would be great if I could have told you back then, oh, this is the one, this is the one, this is the one, and this is the one, and this is the one. But no, you have to plant hundreds to get 5.
That's a great way to plant many seeds. Don't just focus on one or two because, like you said, you don't know which ones are going to sprout. You had mentioned in the book that it's great to start in sales. Why is it good training for your career development?
I think when all is said and done, there are only 2 essential functions. Somebody's got to make it and somebody's got to sell it. And everything else you can hire or you can fake. But if you can't make it, you got nothing to sell. And if you can't sell it, then why make it? So I think, I was never an engineer. So I had to be on the sales side. And I think that, people should not define sales as selling used cars or something like that. I mean, sales is really a form of persuasion and, life. You got to persuade a company to give you a job, persuade to give you a position, persuade to get you a raise. You have to persuade someone to marry you. You got to persuade your kids to pick up their room. You got to persuade the United Airlines check-in person to upgrade you to first class. I mean, you're always persuaded. You got to persuade the restaurant to give you a better table. I mean, if your lips are moving, you're probably selling and persuading.
You're right. I think many people that gets lost with many people that you really need to be able to market and sell yourself, not necessarily just that traditional sales position. You mentioned in the book, patience, resilience, and persuasion are 3 qualities or 3 things that sales training really helps you with for the rest of your life, regardless of the profession that you're in.
when I went into the jewelry business, we were selling to jewelry retailers, and the jewelry selling to retailers is a very difficult business because stuff is made out of gold and diamonds, and they're very, very valuable at one level. But on the other hand, you can stick a ring on a scale and you can know exactly how much gold there is. And then you can check the spot price of gold and figure out, okay, so there's, X dollars worth of raw material. Why is it that you want 10x what the scrap value is for your ring? And, then you got to go in this whole song and dance about design and branding and quality, all that kind of stuff. And so you quickly learn about how to sell, which, as I said, I mean, it's such a valuable skill.
I agree with you. And when you're young and early in your career, I think many people get this wrong. Many leaders that come into it, they want to take charge, have a position of influence. But you say, to become an indispensable asset to your company and your boss, show up, do what nobody wants to do, and try to find ways to broaden your skill set and eventually maybe even own your own niche.
Right. I mean, it's basically, if you want to succeed in life, you got to be indispensable. You can be indispensable to your company. You could be indispensable to your spouse. You could be indispensable to your kids, but it's all about becoming indispensable. And, this is where I may differ in philosophy from perhaps Gen X and Gen Z. I don't think that you can make a difference if your idea of grit is, I'm going to live in Bali and I'm going to telecommute 3 hours a day. I mean, God bless you if you can pull that off, but that's not what I would call, paying your dues.
Right. And doing what nobody else wants to do, really.
Or showing up.
Yeah, exactly. And many people realize too that, make your boss look good. If your boss looks good, you look good.
Yeah, I mean, I wish people would understand that. I think they have this naive belief that, oh, I'm going to make my boss look bad and then they're going to promote me above him or her. Like, I have literally never, ever seen someone get their boss's job because their boss looked bad. I've seen them get their boss's job because the boss got promoted, but not because the boss got fired. And so, tough lesson to learn is the better your boss does, the better you do, because there's the halo effect. Because as your boss progresses, you can just draft along behind him or her. And then at some point, you have such a great halo effect that you become a boss. Maybe it's in another company or maybe it's in another part of your company. But I cannot build the case that, oh, I work for somebody very unsuccessful, so that's why you should promote me. I mean, you think the people who work at Theranos right now, you think they're getting a job offers very easily? I don't think so.
Such a great point to make, and I wish more people would understand that earlier in their careers. You also mentioned something surprising to me, that none of your guests on your podcast followed the route of just going right, fast tracking it right to the top. They all started at entry-level positions and labored for years. And it makes no difference where you begin or who assists you. What matters, and people need to remember this, is your final destination.
Listen, if your idea of success is you're going to go to an Ivy League school and then you're going to go to Goldman Sachs or you're going to go to McKinsey and you have instant success, I mean, yes, I guess that's possible, especially if you're a billionaire's kid. But in general, that's just not how the world works. And God bless you if you can pull it off. But I would say that even if you did pull it off, you probably don't have the worldliness to then succeed, because you gotta learn, you gotta take your lumps, you gotta show up, you gotta get the shit beat out of you to succeed.
Well, let's move to stage 2, and that's all about grit, activating your aspirations. And you say grit is the most important 4-letter word in the English language for someone trying to be remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as I said, with growth, it comes with risk and it comes with failure. And if you're just going to give up, you're not going to be remarkable. You're not going to make a difference. Now, this is where it's easier to be the author than the reader because I'm telling you, you got to keep persevering through failure and you got to be gritty and you cannot give up, man. That's easy for me to say, well, hard for you to do, but that's what it takes. And the first part of growth was based on the work of Carol Dweck. The second part of grit is based on the work of Angela Duckworth. She wrote a book called Grit.
And it's a great book. You've had her on, I think, the podcast, I think, 3 times. And you have some great insights into what people should consider going into. And that first is find where you can alleviate pain. Instead of looking at things where maybe you're interested in, look at the customer's needs first and where are they having problems or pain points.
Yeah. So I think that, where there's money, excuse me, I said that wrong. Where there's pain, there's money. Where there's money, there's not necessarily pain. But anyway, so you know what? I mean, in Silicon Valley, we have this dichotomy that when you have pain, you're willing to pay to get rid of that pain. Whereas if you have just a supplement, if you're just promising, better, faster, cheaper, or like you're going to have a better life, you're going to be better looking, you're going to be lower body mass, whatever. Those are supplements. This is vitamin A, B, C, D, E, turmeric, whatever. But those are supplements. But continue to use the medical analogy. I mean, what's more valuable to you, a turmeric supplement or something that will cure your migraine headache? And I'm telling you, when you have a migraine headache, you will pay anything to get rid of the migraine headache. Whereas turmeric may have, it may reduce inflammation, but man, I pay a lot more for migraine medicine than turmeric.
When some products start as vitamins, but want to turn into painkillers, because you're right, because there's a definite need to alleviate pain. And you want that painkiller, and that vitamin or supplement's just simply not going to cut it.
Yeah.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.